Welcome to the Worldwide Doula podcast. I'm Barry, I'm a registered nurse and birth doula, and each week I'm joined by a new guest speaker to talk about all things pregnancy, birth, babies, and parenthood. So it's time to sit back and relax as we get into some juicy topics. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm joined by two parental coaches based in Dubai, Karen and Sarah. They have a business called The Wise Parent, where they work with parents to help them gain confidence in their parenting approaches, reduce triggers, and better understand their children and themselves. Welcome, Karen and Sarah. How are you today?
We're good. We're so happy to be here with you.
Thank you so
Super
much for having us,
excited.
Barry.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. So in this episode, we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. We're going to be using my own personal scenario that my husband and I are in at the moment. To give you a bit of background, we've recently just got married in September, and we are thinking of expanding our family in the next year or so. While I'm super excited, my husband is not quite ready yet and would like to make sure that we are properly set up to welcome a baby into our lives, which is very valid. Karen and Sarah will be talking to me about how to approach these conversations with my husband and what kind of things we should talk about to be ready when the time comes. So let's jump in. My first question is, what are the types of conversations and topics couples should start with when they start thinking and talking about having a baby?
This is such a great question. And actually, this is something we wish that all parents that we've worked with, we wish that they've had this conversation before, because bringing a child into your life is a huge responsibility, and it deserves and needs, and actually we think requires a conversation to make sure that both people are aligned on specific objectives and specific ideologies and values that you want to hold within your family. It's an exciting time to plan, but we often get stuck in the idea of being pregnant and what that's going to be like and the conception journey itself. But sometimes we forget that there's that second part to it, which is actually the child raising part. So this is why I think it's so great that you want to talk about this, Barry, because there are a few things that you should look at. For example, evaluating your relationship first. So what's the foundation of your relationship like? Is it strong and sturdy? Is it built and rooted in communication, support, and compassion with each other? Because you don't want to make the mistake of, when things aren't okay, the solution is to have a baby and things will be okay. You want things to be not perfect. No relationship is perfect, but at a place where when things get hard, you have the basics and understanding that you are capable of getting through them, because having a kid really changes your relationship.
I would say that my relationship with my husband has always been quite good, quite strong. We try and communicate when there's a problem. We always try and communicate how we feel towards each other in the moment. And if one of us does happen to be a little bit, I notice that he's a little bit edgy for some reason, I'll say, hey, what's going on? And then sometimes it takes a little bit longer to get the truth out, but we get there in the end. We always try and be really open with our communication, and it might be easier for me to start conversations about having babies with my husband than it might be for a lot of people out there, because a lot of people have trouble communicating these things. To answer the second part of your question, I don't think that we are entering into these conversations thinking that we're just trying to cover up a problem. And I do definitely see that a lot. People are like, oh, our relationship's going down the drain a little bit, we should have a baby, or it's getting a little bit boring in our relationship, let's have a baby. And I don't think that that's the right mindset. I mean, I don't want to put any bad stuff onto people who have done that. I think it's totally fine. And if you have a baby and it makes your relationship better, then that's great. But most of the time, if you're having strains in your relationship before the baby arrives, you're probably it's not going to make it better. So I would say my husband and I have a pretty good relationship. Yeah.
So when we're thinking about the foundation of our relationship, and this is very strongly linked to what common values do you both share? And what are the values that you want to have for your family? It could be so many values, from helpful, generous, kind, respectful, proactive. Is something that actually comes up quite often, especially in that first year of having a child, because proactiveness is something that we seek with each other as partners to pick up where the other person is unable to without having to verbally ask for it. For example, your husband, if you notice that he's feeling a little bit tired or upset about something and you have to kind of pull that out of him, he might not be someone that vocalizes where he's feeling emotionally. And so that might require the partner, or you in that case, to be a little bit more proactive and maybe noticing that, bringing it up, working on it. So that's what we mean by looking at the foundations of your relationship and where you both stand in your values.
Well, we've had conversations around values, and when it comes to our relationship, I think that we always try and be very kind to each other. We really try and have a lot of humor in our relationship and be a little bit like lighthearted, but also not shy away from important conversations. We always try and be kind. I think Josiah is learning to be proactive, which I think is very important. He focuses a lot on his work, so he's very focused most of the time. And so that means that, for instance, when we get up in the morning, I normally feed the dogs. But if I'm not ready before him in the morning to go down to breakfast, because we're living in a resort right now, he will normally jump on his computer and start working, where it will actually take me longer to get ready if he doesn't go and feed the dogs. So I normally have to verbalize, hey, can you go and feed the dogs? Or can you do this for me so that we can get to where we need to be at this time? If we communicate with kindness, something better comes out of it rather than saying something that might be angry or a little bit aggressive. It would probably be met with a little bit of hostility.
I know that both Sarah and I have had these conversations with our partners, and you'll likely have more of them as your responsibilities with a child increases, which is a perfect segue to the second point, which is talking about parental responsibilities. Actually outlining and discussing who does what, and you literally have an outline. So talking about your parental responsibilities, your positive expectations of one another, what you need from each other, and having a clear understanding, that is one of the biggest challenges. I know when I had my baby, when I kind of hoped that my husband would read my mind or just know what to do, created so much of a strain because I was getting agitated with him, expecting him to do something he didn't know he was supposed to do. The way we function is very different. So when we started outlining, that made things so much easier. It's a system that we still use 4 years later. So really outlining parental responsibilities is such a relief. It's something that most parents that we've worked with think that it's just going to happen naturally. It doesn't. You're tired, you haven't slept, you're agitated. Like these are things you can kind of extract from having to deal with later by having them beforehand.
That's a great point. We kind of do it already, but even though we do communicate a lot, there are bits that we don't communicate, which I think will definitely catch up with us when we have babies, because exactly what you said, you're tired, you haven't slept very well, and you're just expecting the other person to read your mind.
At the beginning, when you're having these conversations with your partner about when to conceive and when to have a baby and how to plan, this is the point of the relationship where you can both practice doing the things that are difficult for you. And this goes for anyone that's listening to this episode from your followers. If you struggle with communicating your needs or setting a boundary for yourself, a boundary could be, I'm feeling really tired right now. I need to take 10 minutes to myself. That's setting a boundary. So if you're someone that kind of struggles with that, or if your partner is someone that struggles with that, you want to get the reps in before a baby comes into the picture to practice expressing something that you need and communicating in a more clear way. Because as Karen said, 100% with sleep deprivation, with hormonal fluctuation for the mother, with the relationship being put on hold, the romantic intimacy relationship, because there's a new baby that requires so much of our attention. There's a lot of things that come into the mix that make it even more difficult to do the things that were already difficult to do before the baby came into the family.
Another big one, Barry, I know you're not living in your motherland or your home country right now. So one thing that often comes up throughout your parenting journey from pregnancy, delivery, first year is your support system. There's that saying where it takes a village to raise a kid. Sometimes sometimes we don't have access to our family. I know Sarah lives here without her direct family, and you're living abroad, and whoever is listening might not have that direct family or feel like they have a support system. So one thing to think about is the people that you have that can be there for you as well, apart from just your partner. Is that something available? Is it not? Start recognizing who can be there for you. You know, good friends, good family who can hold that space makes a huge difference in your journey. You've entered a new stage of your life as a woman, as a parent. It really shifts your psychology. You might feel like you have an identity crisis.
Yeah, it's so important. And being on an island where you don't have a lot of your friends around, it does cause a little bit of isolation. Having that emotional support network around you is invaluable, and it definitely prevents postpartum depression.
Yeah. That's another point. Planning how you're going to nurture your relationship, not just with your partner, but with yourself as well when baby joins the family. So that means planning moments where you can be alone or do something to fill your cup, a hobby, a passion, some kind of outlet. Planning how often and sticking to the dates that you plan with your partner, connecting with them. And that's when you use your support system to help you find that time. That's when you use the communication skills with your partner to be like, hey, I'd really like, an hour to, I don't know, sleep in or go to this yoga class or meet a friend for coffee. This is really when you start to use your resources, your communication, so that you can nurture yourself as a new parent, but also find time to nurture your relationship, because the relationship most of the time takes a hit. Almost 70% of couples experience a decline in their relationship satisfaction within the first year of having a child. And a lot of that is because we forget that we have a relationship outside of parent to child. We're so focused on keeping this baby alive and thriving that we take for granted or neglect the other person and their needs. And this goes back to Sarah's point. How capable are you at getting uncomfortable by communicating your needs or setting boundaries? How comfortable are you accessing and using your resources, your support system? Because this is important. Don't forget about yourself. Don't forget about your partner. Do you and your partner make a point to find time to connect with each other, to nurture your relationship, to grow, to learn more about each other as people who intend to grow a family together? Do you find time right now for each other and to nurture that relationship?
With all the technology around, we do, which is good.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, we're very lucky that we live in a place that's a little bit disconnected. Where we live is quite rural. We do allocate time on Sundays for us to spend time together, because every other day of the week we work, but we are always right next to each other. Surprisingly, we haven't gotten sick of each other yet, which is good. But yes, we always try and put our phones away for meal times. And on Sundays, we always try and spend lots of time outside swimming. We go horse riding together. But also we take time to have those difficult conversations, and we don't shy away from them. If I need to have a conversation, I won't delay it.
That's amazing. It's so nice to hear that you have that, because these conversations are actually really difficult for a lot of people.
Let's talk a little bit about parenting. So we've been talking about what kind of conversations you can have with your partner before you start thinking about having a kid. We want to ask you about parenting styles, and what kind of parenting styles do you think that you would have? Do you think that your partner would have? And specifically, what does discipline mean to you? Because this is very much linked to your parenting style. And what we often find is that discipline means something different for every person.
How we were brought up were very different. I was brought up, I would say, gently. My parents did discipline me. They put me in my room when I was being naughty, and occasionally I got a little smack on the bum. But I was very free as a child. I was always running around in the back garden. I didn't have very much technology when I was growing up, which I'm very happy with now. I'm so grateful that I grew up in nature and had the opportunity to express how I felt, which was something that Josiah Josiah did not get when he was growing up. He was brought up in an abusive family. His father never let him be emotional, and I don't know what happened when they were punished, but it wasn't nice. And when it comes to parenting, we have talked about this before. He has said to me that he's a little bit worried that he might carry through some traits. Obviously, we're both very conscious of it. He's acknowledged it. He's taken a lot of time to work through what he went through and all that trauma. But we have addressed that worry, and it's still there. I'm sure that we will cross that bridge when we get to it, but we will be more conscious about it now. With parenting styles, I think that we would both like to be very conscious parents.
You're bringing up a lot of really important points, and considering your husband's childhood, this could be why this conversation around having a baby is something that he's taking very seriously and wants to reflect on himself and what kind of parent he's going to be and how you are both going to co-parent together. And absolutely, you're right that our childhood and the way that we experienced growing up and how our parents responded to us and our emotions and those expressions of emotions, which are called behaviors, very much does get triggered when we become parents. And so, first of all, I just want to clarify, when we say, what does discipline mean? Discipline is very commonly misunderstood and associated with the word punishment. And we want to raise awareness that discipline actually means to teach. So when we discipline, we want to shift our perspective that disciplining doesn't mean to punish because of a behavior that they've done or something bad, quote unquote, that they've done. It's actually an opportunity to teach your child how to behave while they're expressing their emotions, what are appropriate ways of behaving and not. So this is what we mean by disciplining. And I think that this is really important as a foundation to have for two people that are coming together and having these conversations of what kind of parent are we going to be? What kind of parent are you? What kind of parent am I? And if you can both align with this understanding that when we say discipline, it means to teach. And this comes back to the very first thing that I was saying about shared values. And this is incredibly powerful for couples to have this conversation, because when a parent disciplines in a way that is out of alignment with the values that you would have already agreed upon, so you would already have this conversation. This is our shared values that we want to bring into this family. You can have that conversation of, hey, I noticed that you did this thing. And it's not a conversation of, I'm going to blame you and I'm going to accuse you of doing something wrong, but rather, remember that conversation that we had about shared values and we both agreed that kindness is one of our shared values. How did you feel when you did that? Or how did you feel when you put our kid in a timeout? Was that in alignment with our values? Did that feel good to you? And this is an opportunity to have a conversation rather than accusing and blaming and shaming each other. It becomes a more constructive conversation that's, hey, we're on the same team here. You're my partner. That didn't look like it was in alignment. What do you think? And your partner's, instead of feeling attacked, is going to say, yeah, you're right. Actually, I was feeling really triggered. And then you can have a conversation of what is another approach, another way of handling this situation.
You can use examples from friends that you have, not in judgment, but in a way to kind of practice a situation. What you're going to do here is you're going to start understanding how your partner feels, what they would do, why they are acting in this way, what you're doing, and again, bringing it into alignment with those values. The more you can imagine these situations and the more you deeply imagine them, you're going to notice feelings come up for you. That's where your childhood experiences, traumas, your subconscious beliefs start to surface. They really take place when your child is with you in action, but you can start gauging the emotions and how would we parent this situation? How would we teach/discipline in this situation? And you'll notice you have similarities, you'll notice you have differences, and this helps you find a way that feels good for you both in alignment with your family values. So play the imagine game. And it's especially great if you've got friends with kids where you've seen a situation, take it in, notice what the kiddo is doing, and use that to inspire your imagine game.
So what strategies can couples use to start open and honest conversations about, I want to have a baby? How do you feel about this?
So you had mentioned that you had a different kind of childhood than your partner. And this is something that obviously is at the forefront of people's minds when they start thinking about having kids. There's a fear element of, this is a huge responsibility. We're bringing another human into this world. Am I ready to take on those responsibilities? And we had mentioned a lot of things already, like talking about the foundations of your relationship and the shared values, but there's something that comes up, and those are the emotions around it. So how do you have a conversation? How well versed are you in emotional literacy and picking up and validating each other's emotions? So that's the first one that I would really highly recommend, is getting into the practice of validating each other's emotions and how you're feeling around the idea of having a baby. So for example, your partner is maybe a little bit more reluctant or needs a little bit more time before he feels like he's ready to have a baby in comparison to you, who's ready to do it yesterday. So how do you have that conversation? You say, I'm really excited to have a baby. How are you feeling about the idea of having a baby? And he might say, I'm feeling a little bit nervous. And then you can just explore. Each time you have this conversation, focus on one emotion and explore where that emotion is coming from and validate that emotion for each other. Because we know emotions come up because they're trying to tell us something that's important. And so we don't want to shut down each other's emotions, right? We don't want to say, oh no, there's nothing to be nervous about, or there's nothing to be worried about. We've got it all planned. It's going to be okay. We have a great relationship. We want to validate that emotion for each other. So we want to say, I get that you're really nervous about it. Can you tell me more about what it is exactly that's making you feel nervous?
I like that you said don't shut them down, because that's so common. You try and start an open and honest conversation, and then when the person gives you an open and honest answer of how they feel, it's so common to offer solutions rather than just acknowledging what they've said. So that's a really good point.
I think it's natural for us to want to problem solve. But when it comes to the emotional conversation, we just kind of want to sit with that emotion.
Yeah, perfect. And then how can couples identify and address past traumas? How can they address the traumas that might impact their journey on towards parenthood? And what steps do you think that they can take to heal or mitigate these effects of these traumas to help them not carry through into the parenting styles?
Well, first, I think it's important to address what trauma is. What one person perceives as traumatic to them might or might not be the same for others. So, for example, I am one of 4 siblings. We all have and share the same memory of a situation. Only one of us perceived it as trauma, or vice versa. It really depends on the way a person processes something. It is not just what happened to you that is traumatic, it can also be what didn't happen to you or what you observed happening around you as trauma. That's number one. If you can get professional help to work on your traumas before having a kid, that makes a huge difference in your parenting, because children are very good at reminding us of the things that we still haven't healed from. And trauma is a big part of that. Kids remind us of those childhood wounds that we still hold as trauma. And the more that we work on them, the smoother things will be when we have our own children. And we can say this from our own experiences. Your trauma or your working on yourself won't stop. You will continue to work on yourself, but it's just about getting comfortable knowing that you are able to heal those parts of yourself.
You gave a really good answer to this question. When you were describing your childhood and comparing it to how your husband's childhood might have differed, you had mentioned, I was allowed to play outside. I was a very happy, free kid. I might have gotten a pat on the bum, but in general, I was allowed to kind of feel things and have this range of emotions. This indicates that you felt secure and safe generally in your childhood experiences. You felt kind of a freedom. You felt good. And your husband, who might have had different experience, might have processed his memories in his childhood in a different way. And so to answer your question of how can couples identify and address past trauma, so how can you have that conversation together, is kind of have a walk down memory lane with each other and talk about, when I felt really sad and I expressed it by having a tantrum or crying a lot, my parent responded in this way, and this is how I understood that. And then have that same conversation where you ask your partner, what about you? How did your family respond to you when you felt really sad or upset about something? And the way that you each respectively respond and kind of recollect your memories of your childhood is an indication of how that gets processed. Is it processed as trauma? And just to caveat that, trauma today, there's so much research and there's a lot of shifting in how we understand trauma and how we have historically understood trauma to be. Trauma doesn't necessarily mean that a traumatic event must have happened for you to be traumatized. Trauma can be be exactly as Karen was saying, it's the way that you process things. And with childhood experiences, it's developmental trauma, it's complex trauma, it's little things that might have been happening every single day of your childhood that would have taught you that expressing this emotion is unsafe. And how that shows up today as a parent is when my child starts expressing that same emotion that I was not allowed to express, what does that trigger in me? And how do I respond to that? So this is where it's important, if you don't yet have a kid and you're having these conversations with your partner, is getting to that childhood memory and those childhood experiences and focus around the emotions and what emotions were allowed and which emotions were not allowed in your childhood.
Yeah, I definitely can relate back to some real life situations there. For instance, in some scenarios in his childhood, one of his siblings didn't get punished as much as the other one, or this period in our childhood was really bad for this person because they were almost singled out and they got most of the abuse. Abuse is real, and it might be emotional abuse, or it might be physical abuse, or it might be they got brought up with really strict parents. You know, we weren't allowed to act a certain way. We weren't allowed to express a certain emotion because it showed weakness. I actually recently read Dr. Becky's book, Good Inside. I've been finding it really insightful on the fact that your child's emotions are valid. They're trying to communicate something, whether they're throwing their arms up and screaming at you or doing something that they know that they're not allowed to do. It's all valid. And there's a reason behind it. And rather than reacting and having that trigger, take a step back and say, what's going on here? How can I react to this? How can I address this in a conscious way? If you're trying to have conversations that are a little bit difficult or you're not getting the answer that you expected, try and just take a breath and take a step back and try and understand maybe what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and how their past might be influencing this moment right here, and go from there, because there is a reason for every reaction. There's a reason why we communicate a certain way in a certain situation, but just understanding that is a bit more difficult. And sometimes we just have to take a breath and look at the bigger picture.
Absolutely. Beautifully said. The way that you communicate with each other and the more that you practice with each other, this new way, if it is a new way of communicating, where you hold space for each other, where you validate each other's emotions, and where you feel safe to express those emotions and allow those emotions to be there, and really distinguish that reactivity, if it is kind of a triggering conversation and someone reacts in a certain way, to distinguish that reaction and that behavior from the way that they're feeling. And this is the foundation of how you will then be communicating and parenting your own children.
Definitely. Karen and Sarah, thank you so much for coming on to talk to me today. I've learned so many things that I can actually use, and I'm super excited to put them into practice, because we'll be having these conversations very soon, or we've already started actually, but it's always good to learn more. I think it's so important to know what things you should discuss, even if you're not married yet, or if you're not thinking of getting married. These conversations are definitely something that you should have before welcoming a baby, however you choose to do it. If you choose to have a baby, surrogate, adoption, any extra addition to the family.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, Barry, and good luck with your conversations.
Yeah, I'm super excited. Amazing. Everyone, you can find Karen and Sarah at The Wise Parent on Instagram. And if you're enjoying the podcast, make sure you give us a follow and rate the show so that we can spread the word and educate more mamas and women worldwide. And we will see you next Monday for another juicy episode. For more information on pregnancy, birth, and parenthood, head over to my website or Instagram at blissfulbirth.co. And just a little reminder, the information contained in this podcast is here to educate and empower, and does not replace the advice of your own healthcare provider.